I dropped the microphone. Well, I've enjoyed our time together. It's always too quick and seemed like we're having to get back on the road very quickly. And Brother Dan, did you get my message on your phone? I left a message, a happy birthday to you. It just doesn't seem right when I come here and you're not here. But I love each one of you and appreciate you very much in the Lord, and it did my heart good to see these young people participating like that, and thank Brother Roy for including them, because you're important as well. I'd like us to open our Bibles to the first chapter of the book of Romans for just a few minutes this afternoon. I'd like to talk to you a little while about Paul's 3 I ams. Paul's 3 I ams. You know, the Apostle Paul loved the Lord and he loved the people of God. He was converted in Acts chapter 9 in a miraculous way. Having been a persecutor of the church, his career was abruptly interrupted by the appearance of Jesus Christ. And you know, when somebody sees Christ for the first time, they're never the same. Never the same. Jesus makes all the difference in the world. And the Apostle Paul had a tremendous vision. He had a vision of service. He had a vision of spreading the gospel. And he had a vision of suffering for the gospel. Because when the Lord called him to preach, he did so in an interesting way. He said to Ananias, he is a chosen vessel unto me, and I will show him how great things he must suffer for my namesake. So the Apostle Paul had this special calling. And in that special calling, he had apostolic authority. And as such, he would write a church like the church at Rome. A church that he had never been to. See, the Apostle Paul had never been to Rome at this period of time. He had a heart for them. He had a desire to be among them. But it wasn't God's plan. It wasn't God's purpose for him to be there at this time. But the church was like a lot of our churches today. There were a lot of questions that arose over doctrine and practice and the meaning and purpose of the church. And the letter that he wrote to the Romans is a letter that is doctrinal. It's filled with doctrine. It's a mighty defense, apologetic, if you will, of the doctrines of sovereign grace. I've never been in a public discussion in my life that I didn't refer again and again to the book of Romans. It's doctrinal, but it's also testamentary. By that I mean when we write a last will and testament, we are including the most important things to us that we're bequeathing, we're leaving to the next generation. And that's the characteristic of this letter. It's truly testamentary. But what I find in the first, or what we could call the introduction or greeting that the Apostle Paul uses in this letter is highly insightful into what the Apostle Paul was all about. And we've titled it Paul's 3 I ams. You know, he says in verse 14, we're going to be looking at verses 14, 15, and 16. He says, I am debtor, both to the Greeks and to the barbarians, both to the wise and to the unwise. Here, the Apostle Paul is speaking of a holy obligation that he was called to, not only to preach the gospel to the folks that he liked, the folks that he felt comfortable with, the folks that perhaps he grew up with, but he said, I'm a debtor. I'm under obligation both to the Greeks and to the barbarians. The Greeks were considered such because of their cultural contribution to the world. They contributed a great deal to the world, not only linguistically through the language of the Greeks, but also through art, through philosophy, through science, through mathematics. Many of the books that you and I study in a college level will have formulas that were actually coming from Greek scholarship thousands of years ago. They were highly cultural in so many ways. And Paul says, I'm a debtor. I'm a debtor to those highly educated, those highly culturalized people, those wealthy individuals that contributed so much to the Roman Greco world. I am a debtor to the Greeks, but I'm also a debtor to the barbarians. The barbarians were considered the unlearned, the offscouring of the earth, the poorest of the poor. They were individuals that lived the same way in their day as their forefathers did 1,000 years before. They were an unlearned and uneducated people. And he says, I'm a debtor. I'm under holy obligation to preach the gospel to all men, not just the Jewish people, both to the wise and to the unwise. The wise being in reference to the Greeks, who had a lot of wisdom, worldly wisdom, and also the unwise, the barbarians, the barbaros. That's where the word comes from. Their language. I don't know if you've ever been around German people. I don't know if you've ever been around the language of Germans, but you better bring a towel with you, because as they're talking to you, if they're close enough, you'll get spit on. I mean, their language is barbaric, and that's where that term actually originated from. And of course, the Greek language is a very smooth, romantic type language. But what's interesting to me is, the Apostle Paul said something to the Corinthian brethren who were Greeks. He said to them in 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 1, And I, brethren, when I came among you, came not with excellency of speech nor of wisdom, for I determined to know nothing among you save Jesus Christ and Him crucified. See, that was the basis of Paul's debt. He says, I'm a debtor to tell people about Jesus and the cross. Jesus and redemption. Jesus and the only means by which men are reconciled to a holy God. I'm a debtor. He felt himself under that divine obligation to be a bearer of good news, a bearer of the gospel. The word gospel simply means good news. And brothers and sisters, the best news, the good news of the gospel today is that Jesus Christ came into the world to save sinners. He came not to attempt salvation, not to make salvation possible, but He came into the world to save His people from their sins. And every one of His people are a sinner. And see, if you're here this afternoon and you feel to be a sinner, the gospel will be good news to you, because He has come to save sinners. So Paul's first I am is a colloquial debt that he feels obligated toward non-Jewish people. But his second I am in this context is verse 15, so as much as in me is, I am ready. First he says I'm a debtor, but now he says I am ready. I am ready to preach the gospel to you that are at Rome also. I believe that this is descriptive of holy zeal. He was a very zealous man in the kingdom work. He was a great example of what holy zeal is all about. Turn your Bible back to Acts chapter 26 very quickly. Acts 26. This is later on in the ministry of Paul when he is about to go to Rome in Acts chapter 26. You know, he's relating his experience of grace before King Agrippa. And he says something here. In verse 15, and I said, Who art thou, Lord? And he said, I am Jesus whom thou persecutest. But rise and stand upon thy feet, for I have appeared unto thee for this purpose, to make thee a minister and a witness both of these things which thou hast seen, and of those things in the which I will appear unto thee, delivering thee from the people and from the Gentiles, unto whom now I send thee. Here's his commission. Why? Why is God going to send the gospel to the nations? Verse 18, to open their eyes, to turn them from darkness to light, from the power of Satan unto God, that they may receive forgiveness of sins and an inheritance among them which are sanctified by faith that is in me. You see, the Apostle Paul was not only a debtor, but he was made ready to preach this good news even at Rome. He was ready in the sense that he was qualified. Now, this is something that's important for us to understand. Some say that God calls the qualified. But realistically and biblically, we can say that God qualifies the called. He equips those that he calls to function in the position that they have been called. And in that way, he gets the glory. He gets the credit, as it were. I believe that each member of the body of Christ has a gift of some kind. You know, I'm glad we have song leaders like Brother Roy and Brother Dan. I'm glad we have that. I consider that a gift. Me, the way I sing by open letter. That means I open my mouth and let her fly. Among the primitive Baptists, we sing four-part harmony. And my gift is I sing all four parts on every song. My wife often looks at me and says, I have a granddaughter that I'm real close to, and she'll sit with us in church, and she'll look at me and say, Poppy, you're flat. But I'm trying to make a joyful noise to the Lord. The Apostle Paul says, I'm ready. All that I am, I'm ready. As much as in me is. Now that's an important qualification. Because I certainly wouldn't do well on a basketball court. I wouldn't do well playing the Super Bowl this afternoon. I know that. I acknowledge that. I am not equipped to do those kind of things. But what I am equipped to do, I should be willing to do. See, I shouldn't be lazy with whatever God has given me the talent to do. And every talent is needed. You know, we need people like Brother Bob that's able to come and work at the building. We need these sisters' ability to cook these delicious meals and do so much for the church. We need deacons like Brother Justin. We need elders and ministers like Brother JC. We need one another. And we need to be ready to exercise the gift that God has given us. If it's singing, praying, preaching, serving, whatever it is, we need to be acknowledging that as much as in me is, I'm ready. I'm ready to be used by the Lord. And then the third I am is verse 16, one of my favorite verses in the whole letter. And by the way, there's a bunch of them in Romans that we love. But this one's always meant a lot to me. He says, for I am not ashamed. See, he says, I'm a debtor. I'm ready. Now I'm unashamed. I'm unashamed of the gospel, the good news of Jesus Christ. Why? Why, Paul? For it is the power of God, listen to it carefully, unto salvation to everyone that believeth, and to the Jew first, and also to the Greek. Now let that soak in just a moment. I am unashamed of the gospel. You know, brothers and sisters, I think we're living in a day where people need to hear the gospel. When I look at the condition of our nation and see what's happening in our government and in our land, in this invasion on the southern border, when I see all of the crime and the drugs and the confusion that there is in our nation, brothers and sisters, the answer is not political. It's spiritual. We need to be sharing the gospel. And the only reason we wouldn't share the gospel is we've become ashamed of it or ashamed of ourselves in it. One of those two. But brothers and sisters, the Apostle Paul didn't have that trouble at all. The Apostle Paul says, I want you to understand, I may even die for the sake of the gospel, but I'm not ashamed of it. I'm not ashamed of the gospel, and I don't want the gospel to be ashamed of me. I think about Paul's holy boldness. Oh, what a great example. What a great example to be bold in the faith. The Apostle Paul was imprisoned at Philippi in Acts chapter 16, verse 23. He was forced out of Thessalonica in Acts chapter 17, verse 10. He was smuggled out of Berea in Acts chapter 17, verse 32. He was regarded as a simpleton or a fool by the learned of Corinth in 1 Corinthians 1:18. He was stoned in Galatia in Acts chapter 14, verse 19. And yet, he says, I'm ready to preach the gospel again. That's boldness, brothers. He didn't allow the stoning. He didn't allow the persecution. He didn't allow the struggle and the deprivation that he was experiencing to detract him from his singular goal of publishing the gospel of Jesus Christ. Why, Paul? Because I'm not ashamed of it. I'm not ashamed of the gospel of sovereign grace. I hope to stand by it and defend it to the day I die. I pray that I'll never be ashamed to tell men, mankind, if you will, that from a standpoint of nature, they're born dead in trespasses and in sin, devoid of any capacity to please the God of heaven. I hope I'm never ashamed to defend the doctrine of unconditional election, whereby God, before the foundation of the world, chose a people in Christ to be His very own. I hope I'm never ashamed to stand by the definite atonement of Jesus Christ upon the tree of the cross. That He knew exactly who He came to save, and He got the job done, and I believe He got what He paid for. I hope I'm not ashamed to understand the power of God in the salvation of a single sinner. It is an irresistible, effectual calling of grace into the soul of a benighted sinner. I hope I'm never ashamed to defend the truth that God will preserve His elect throughout all eternity. And that, along with preservation, and that they will persevere in faith, firm unto the end. I hope brothers and sisters, I hope I never become ashamed of that, because the Apostle Paul wasn't. I am not ashamed of the true gospel of Jesus Christ. Now, don't misunderstand me. I don't want to be taken as being belligerent or argumentative or someone that is attacking people that don't agree with us on these points. I think that's wrong. I do not believe that that's the winsome way to convert people to the truth. And I have to confess something right now. My wife is looking at me with those eyes. She's saying, you better make a confession. I haven't always felt that way. But you know what I've learned through these years, brothers and sisters? I've learned that it's better to win a soul than it is to win an argument. I used to be good at winning arguments, but today I'm more concerned about the soul of individuals. I want to win them to the truth, and the only way they'll listen to us, Brother Dan, is if we're kind. And I haven't always done that. My wife, that's why she's looking at me. But brothers and sisters, I've learned some things. I've learned that you can't beat people over the head with these doctrines. And we should never expect them to have the same level of understanding of these scriptures as we do, who've loved them and known them for many years. Sometimes they need a little time. Sometimes they need a little space. And so we just give them line upon line and precept upon precept. Here a little and there a little. Not just dump the whole load on them at one time. I've learned that the hard way. So the Apostle Paul says, I am not ashamed of the gospel of Jesus Christ, for it is the power of God, the dunamis, the dynamite. There's dynamite in it. When the Spirit is attending the preached word, I'm telling you, it's effectual. I'm telling you that it makes a difference in the life of the hearer, even in the lives of those that disagree with you. Because what you're doing is planting seeds. You're planting the seeds of truth into the lives of individuals. It is the power of God unto salvation, to the Jew first, and also to the Greek. Now, why do you think, Brother Larry, why did he say it that way? Why does the Apostle Paul continually say to the Jew first and also to the Greek? All the way through the Roman letter, he makes that distinction. I'll tell you why. Because the Jewish people are held to a higher level of accountability than the Gentiles, than the barbarians, because of what they've been given. Do you understand that? Do you understand why the Apostle Paul said in Romans chapter 3, verse 1, what advantage hath the Jew? Much in every way, for unto them were committed the oracles of God. They had something that no other nation had. They had the law, they had the prophets, they had the righteous kings, the judges that were miraculous, like Samson. Right, Zach? And Gideon. You know, individuals that God used in a mighty, mighty way. Well, if that is true, and you've conceded already that it's true, if they're held to such a high accountability, how much more are we held accountable, who have been given this wonderful revelation of true doctrine, the truth of salvation by grace, the truth of the effectual nature of the saving work of Christ when He came to the cross. How much more accountable are we? And you know what? And I say this with a great deal of sorrow. Many of us have never even shared our faith or our understanding of the Scriptures with anyone. We've bought into this line that it's every individual's right or every individual's privilege to be whatever they want to be. But the Apostle Paul didn't agree with that. The Apostle Paul did not agree that it was good to leave pagan people living pagan lives. Because the Apostle Paul knew that they were on the highway to hell. And he had a message. He had a message that told them of a better way, a better life, a better reality. So Paul says, I am not ashamed of the gospel of Jesus Christ, for it is the power of God unto salvation, to the Jew first and also to the Greek. For therein is the righteousness of God. You see, the righteousness that God accepts. Do you know anybody that needs to know that God doesn't accept every kind of righteousness? Somebody says, well, Brother Jeff, all I am interested in is living a good life, because I know that if I come to the end of the day and my good works outweigh my bad works, I know that God will surely let me into His heaven. I just know that God will let me there because I've been so good. Now, brothers and sisters, now that sounds a little exaggerated, but there's so many people that believe that. And I'm talking about good neighbors, good workers, good people in our community that really think that they're okay with God because of the good things that they think they're doing. But brothers and sisters, God will only accept one kind of righteousness. And that's the righteousness that's imputed to us through Jesus Christ. That's the only righteousness that He's going to accept. You know why, Brother Bill? Because that's the only righteousness that's good enough for God Himself. So Jesus came to become our righteousness. That's what Paul meant. That's what he said, actually, in 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 21. He who knew no sin was made to be sin for us, that we might be made the righteousness of God in Him. Somebody says, well, Brother Dan, it doesn't make any difference what you believe. You know, some people believe in Jesus. Some people believe in Muhammad. Some people believe in Buddha. Everybody's got their own way to heaven. And one way or the other, everybody's going to get there at the end of time. I'm going to tell you that's a heresy out of the belly of hell. I want to defend. I don't want to ever be ashamed of the true gospel that states that it is through Christ alone that we have acceptance with the Father. Jesus said, no man comes unto the Father except by me. John 14:6. He taught the truth, you see. He was not ashamed of the truth, nor should we be. So where are you this afternoon? With respect to these three I ams. You know, I think about this. Donna and I were doing our devotions this week, and we're reading about Peter, and how, Peter is the most American of all the apostles, isn't he? Isn't he? I mean, we read Peter, we say, oh, there I am. I see me right there. Well, Peter stood up and he says, Jesus, all these turkeys, these brethren, all these lily-livered cowards, these brethren, they're going to forsake it, but I'll guarantee you I won't. He said, I'll go to prison. I'll go to prison with you. And then he said something. He said, I'll even die for you. And Jesus said, Peter, before the rooster crows. Can you get this? And how it must have shocked Peter to no end when Jesus looked at him with those compassionate eyes and said, before the rooster crows, you're going to deny me 3 times this night. Oh, how unbelievable that must have been to Peter, to his mind. But what me and Donna were talking about was when they took Jesus away, Peter followed afar off. Do you remember reading that? Do you remember that? Peter followed him afar off. And when he came into the plaza, And by the way, Donna and I have been to that plaza, physically. There was a great plaza between the house of Annas and the house of Caiaphas. And they've got a monument of a rooster in that plaza, remembering Peter. Because Peter was in that plaza. And when he was asked 3 times, "Do you know this man? Are you one of his disciples?" He said, "I am not." I call it Peter's 3 I am nots. I am not. Jesus is the great I am. Peter is the great I am not. Right there. What a tremendous contrast. And then later we come to the ministry of the Apostle Paul, and here he is, and he's saying, I am. I am ready. I am unashamed. I am a debtor. See, he was recognizing what he truly was in the ministry of Christ. How about you this afternoon? Are you an I am, or are you an I am not? Be careful how you answer that. I want to close with this thought. I honestly believe that God uses ordinary people like you and me. Small churches like Coweta. Small talents like the one before you. I believe He uses us in extraordinary ways when we come to the place that the Apostle Paul did, recognizing our responsibility. And how do you define responsibility anyway? It's our response to the abilities that God has given us. Responsibility. It's our response to the abilities that God has given us. So I see these young people singing. That's a great gift. I was listening very carefully. You sing better than I do. Therefore, I will, when you're singing, I will sing softer. One brother told me, he says, "Brother Jeff, you need to sing a solo." I said, "A solo?" He said, "Yeah, a solo, nobody can hear you." So these young people need to use that talent. You need to use the talent that God gave you. Those of us that have other talents, we need to use them, realizing that God has given us this ability for a reason. And that reason is to bring glory to His name. I believe if we follow that example of Paul, when we come to the end of our journey, Brother JC, we'll lay down in peace and in the consolation of Paul's 3 I ams. God bless you. Thank you for your good attention. Come ahead, Brother Roy.